Leahy every Sunday afternoon at 5 on AM 560 The Answer.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So House Speaker Nancy Pelosi emerged from her conclave with the Democrat Socialists yesterday about whether or not to move forward with a formal impeachment inquiry and said this.
It was a very positive meeting, a respectful sharing of ideas, and I think a very impressive presentation by our chairs. We do believe that it's important for to follow the facts. We believe that no one is above the law, including the President of the United States, and we believe that the President of the United States is engaged in a cover-up, and that was the nature of the meeting.
Engaged in a cover-up of what? It's not exactly certain because there was no real definition to it. Now, of course, I wanted to know as well, other follow-up questions, is the caucus committed to fighting colonial cauliflower like Ocasio-Cortez and Ocasio-Cortez and Chief Warren committed to forcing a rewrite of the Game of Thrones series finale? Those are the big
Feminists
issues.
unite. Well, she did say the I word. That's what President Trump called it, the impeachment word. And he didn't take to that kindly and cut the meeting short that was on a infrastructure bill and went to the Rose Garden. And he was upset because he's sick of this witch hunt.
We can solve the problem on the border in 15 minutes if the Democrats would give us a few votes. So I just wanted to let you know that I walked into the room and I told Senator Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, I want to do infrastructure. I want to do it more than you want to do it. I'd be really good at that. That's what I do. But you know what? You can't do it under these circumstances. So get these phony investigations over with. The Wall Street Journal just wrote today, just a little while ago, I saw it.
And he went on to talk about that article. But get the phony investigations over with, and then we can sit down and negotiate.
Well, on that basis, don't get the phony investigations over with because we don't need a $2 trillion boondoggle. We don't need to double down on digging money pits from 2009 when $800 billion resulted in $30 billion of that small a segment actually going to the sort of surface and mass transit infrastructure that politicians talk about and then turn around and pork barrel all the money that's approved. For more on this topic and where these investigations go, and is it, as Alex Shepard writes in New Republic, impeachment is now an inevitability. We're pleased to be joined by Darren Samuelsohn. He's a senior White House reporter for Politico, and he, in his spare time, reviews congressional testimony of Bob Mueller. Fascinating life. Darren, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Yes, that's what I was doing while the rest of the country was watching Game of Thrones.
There you go. All right. Well, just first in terms of the dynamic. So Pelosi emerges from the caucus meeting and sort of parrots the line of those who are pro-impeachment without committing to support the inquiry moving forward. She's trying to straddle the two sides, isn't she?
That's correct. Yeah, she's the in charge and will pull the trigger if we do go down an impeachment road. Even deciding whether to begin the impeachment investigation process, which is different than an actual vote to impeach the president. Democrats have been investigating here since they took over in January with all kinds of requests for information, subpoenas for documents and testimony from people in the Trump administration, people who were part of Robert Mueller's investigation. Those different attempts to get that information has largely been blocked by the Trump legal team. There have been a couple quick early legal victories that the Democrats have enjoyed. They got one yesterday in New York City, and they got one earlier this week by a federal judge in Washington, D.C. That's likely to mean that they're going to soon be seeing, well, I shouldn't say soon, but they will be seeing Trump's financial records, his tax documents, if the appeals that the Trump world is lodging are unsuccessful. So those are obviously, we've got a couple more months of legal fights going ahead. But yeah, back in Congress, the fight over impeachment is something that the rank and file, the people in her caucus, are clamoring for. They even say that impeachment would, if they could even just begin the impeachment process, they'd have a better chance legally of getting those documents through the courts, that the judges from the various federal districts have actually, in the past, during Watergate and in the Clinton era, when impeachment is actually happening, are more likely to give deference to the lawmakers to have access to this material.
But what's the actual impeachable offense?
So the impeachable offenses, I think, you've seen a number of proposals already written. Obstruction of justice is probably what the Democrats would lead with. Obviously, the Mueller report has 10 different accounts of instances where President Trump, allegedly tried to stymie various parts of the Mueller probe, asking for it to be, shut down, urging his lawyers and staffers to try and find ways to, navigate around it or end it. Whether, the definition of high crimes and misdemeanors, which is an impeachable offense, is very different than what you would argue in a court of law. We've only obviously gone through this a couple of times in American history. It's never actually gone all the way to the very end of the process with the president actually being convicted in the Senate. Twice this has happened in Andrew Johnson's case and in Bill Clinton's case, and we know in both instances it didn't go through. So, this is something where the Democrats are trying to navigate and decide whether they feel that these offenses, whether they be the obstruction of justice instances, or there's other stuff too. There's the president's personal finances. There's other things that they are in the process of trying to get their fingers on, and that's what's going on here.
But the personal finances is a fishing expedition. They haven't asserted anything. And with respect to obstruction of justice, as Alan Dershowitz has argued, you can't obstruct justice when you have the power to do something that you ended up not doing. Forget whether or not there's an underlying crime, which of course Mueller found there wasn't. So it's a complicated case for them to make out, it would seem to me. But the more interesting thing about the caucus split, at least as reported in Alex Shepard's piece I mentioned, New Republic, is Sherry Bustos, the DCCC chairman for this cycle, and Ben Lujan, the DCCC chairman for last cycle, both oppose moving forward with a formal impeachment inquiry at this time. And those are two individuals that have to have sort of broad perspective on the political landscape around the country and all these competitive congressional races that they have to hold or win. So it's just interesting that those two are on the opposite side of the Nadlers and the backbenchers. And I wonder if that says something about what Pelosi and those Politico Democrats think about the politics of this.
Yeah, the politics are interesting. I mean, we don't have much history to go on with respect to the politics of impeachment. There is definitely in the Democratic base a feeling like we just won the House of Representatives. We should be investigating and following all these avenues and see where they lead. And we need to keep our base invigorated. So those would be in the dark blue, congressional districts that the Democrats just, are holding on to. And then you do have these swing districts that they just won to take the majority. And there is a concern that you are pointing to in the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, that if they go down the impeachment road, that these members could be vulnerable come November, almost 16 months from now, because they haven't been working on pocketbook issues that people really care about. That's to be seen whether that actually would be something that would blow back on them on the impeachment front. I think, the one example everyone points to is 1998 in the midterm elections after the House Republicans opened an impeachment inquiry on Bill Clinton. And then there was votes. The congressional midterm elections happened right after that. The Republicans were expecting to have big wins in 1998. Instead, the Democrats actually, people felt sympathetic toward Bill Clinton and ended up netting a couple of seats in the House and the Senate. Mm-hmm. And Newt Gingrich suffered some payback. He actually lost his speakership over this. This led to the Livingston debacle, too. So you had major changes in House Republican leadership. Obviously, you can flash forward 2 more years to 2000, and Al Gore runs into the headwinds of the Bill Clinton scandal, and George Bush, for some, in some arguments would say got elected in part because of the memories of how Clinton's presidency was run. So that's really the only example we have. It's a long time ago. I think Donald Trump has scrambled the entire political landscape here. That I don't know that 1998 is really a very good reflection, but that's the one everyone keeps coming back to. That's what the DCCC members are kind of cautious of. But again, the politics are very different in 2018, 2020, where we have people consuming media in totally different ways. We have people, on the left and the right absorbing media in different ways. We have obviously a president who has used social media and other ways to communicate that are just totally different than the way Bill Clinton and people operated in 1998.
Yeah. Before we get to your piece about the 20 hours of Bob Mueller testifying before Congress you watched, which I'm sure was scintillating, the question of whether Bob Mueller will testify at all, a report earlier this week on CNN suggests that he's hesitant to do it, even though he's been given the green light by Barr to do whatever he wants to do. What's your sense of where he's at?
I think we'll get Robert Mueller's testimony from Congress probably. It's not going to happen this week. It was actually supposed to happen, or at least the Democrats wanted it to happen today. Right now, as we're talking, and probably we would have been gearing up if the Democrats had been able to pull it off before the Memorial Day recess. Instead, we'll come back in June. I think ultimately they'll find a way to get Bob Mueller to testify on Capitol Hill in a public forum and probably in a private setting as well. There is hesitancy, whether it's because of Bob Mueller's hesitancy. I think he is a little bit nervous about coming before a very partisan House Judiciary Committee where, he has, for the last 2 years, really said zero publicly. But to walk into that snake pit could be something that I think he's worried about. But then there is something going on with the Justice Department where they are not quite giving Bob Mueller the explanation for what he can say, what he can't say publicly, and they're kind of dragging him along. This is what the Democrats are saying that they're picking up, and that has caused some of the delay here in terms of whether Bob Mueller is allowed to talk about the material that's blacked out in that report, which the Democrats have been, fighting to get. A whole bunch of people are trying to see what's behind the redactions in the actual Mueller report.
And besides Bob Mueller, do they want to talk to any of the 18 other lawyers that were working underneath him?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Oh, I said besides Robert Mueller, the attorneys who are working for him and on this investigation, is there any interest in interviewing them?
I think that there is, yes. Certainly the people who worked under Bob Mueller, know the weeds and the details of the investigation. Right now, the focus is completely on Bob Mueller and trying to get him there. Some of the people who worked under Mueller have gone and left the government already and are back at private practice. A couple of the high-profile names have left and gone back to academia and private practice. We don't know about some of the others. It seems like a lot of them, many of them are government employees who have gone also to their previous positions in the Justice Department, or maybe moved on to other positions in the Justice Department. But I think they are all, able and ready to testify. And I don't know that we're going to see them in public, but certainly as I've talked to Democratic members of Congress, they are interested in interviewing some of those folks as well.
Well, so your piece about Bob Mueller's testimony before, of course, he's FBI director, so he's testified before Congress many, many times. And what is it that you can sort of glean from watching his previous testimony that we could expect from him if he testifies about a 450-page report that he authored, at least authored in principle? What more are we going to get from him, do you think, that's not contained in the report?
Well, watching Bob Mueller testify, for one thing, is kind of fascinating in the fact that we haven't heard his voice for 2+ years as he's been running this investigation, seen the same video images of him over and over on cable television with the sound turned off. So if you go back, there's 150+ hours of C-SPAN footage of Robert Mueller from 2001. He was confirmed by the Senate, I think, about 40 days before September 11th, 2001. You can watch him all the way from there, all the way through the Bush era, implementing the Patriot Act, reorganizing the FBI after 9/11, all the way through to Edward Snowden, and in 2013 when he's serving in the Obama administration as the FBI director, post Boston Marathon bombing. You get an amazing arc of what Bob Mueller is like, and hear his voice. Just his voice alone, I thought, was fascinating. As a witness, he is by the book. We've always expected that he would probably stick to what is in the contours of the Mueller report, and you can see that as he testifies to members of Congress. He makes eye contact. He has a sense of humor. When members are pushing him, he doesn't like to be interrupted by members of Congress. They obviously, only have a couple of minutes to ask questions, so that was where things can get kind of touchy. What else can I tell you about what Robert Mueller is like? It would be, I think, if he's testifying before Capitol Hill, he is not going to let people misstate facts. I think he will correct people if they skew his report findings, and I think we'll be watching very closely to see, if he tries to explain where the daylight is between him and the way William Barr, the Attorney General, rolled out the report.
In addition to that, too, explain why he didn't make a call that he was charged to make meaning
Well,
obstruction.
That is a complicated question. He fell back on an opinion that was always, hanging out there, and it was from Watergate, and it also goes to the Bill Clinton era that the Justice Department has long found that the sitting president of the United States cannot be indicted while in office. And under the rules that he was, working under, he was not really supposed to transmit, the impeachable offenses kind of category as well that you saw from the Ken Starr era. That there was actually a law that required Ken Starr to tell Congress if he found impeachable offenses. Robert Mueller was not working under that set of laws that basically expired after the Whitewater, Ken Starr, Monica Lewinsky era. And so Mueller had a little bit of a more narrow mandate that, again, precluded him from prosecuting the president, though he certainly, as he said in the report, he, is presenting this evidence. He's preserving this evidence. If a prosecutor in the future might want to charge President Trump after he's the president of the United States, which is certainly a possibility if he loses in his second term or after in 2025, those are sort of hanging out there. And that's what Mueller did there. And then, secondly, he did say as well that, he is still giving this information to the public. And this is now what Congress is fighting over, trying to get itself the underlying evidence to decide whether there are, quote unquote, impeachable offenses, which, again, like I said at the start, high crimes and misdemeanors is not a very well defined term in the Constitution. It's written about in the Federalist Papers as well by Mr. Hamilton. But, this is really on Congress to decide whether they want to, this is conduct that's enough to warrant removing a president. And then, the next huge step, which is a Senate trial where you need 2/3 of the Senate. And really at this moment, there is no sign that that would happen. So we would probably have a House vote to impeach the president. But then, like in the Bill Clinton era, I don't even know that we would get a trial that Mitch McConnell would allow that to go forward. But, a Senate trial, if there was one, would probably not lead to 67 votes. And so we would have an impeached president, at some point going into the 2020 election.
He is Darren Samuelsohn, senior White House reporter for Politico. His piece is about watching 20 hours of Mueller testifying before Congress, as he was just recounting. Darren, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.